It was just another Friday evening in the bustling heart of the city, where neon signs flickered, and the hum of conversations and laughter filled the air. The streets were alive with people dressed in their finest outfits, all eager to experience the glamour of the city's most exclusive club, Eclipse. The line stretched around the corner, buzzing with anticipation. Somewhere near the middle of that line stood 17-year-old Max Harper. Max shifted uncomfortably, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his worn-out jacket. His sneakers, scuffed from years of use, tapped nervously against the pavement. The cold air nipped at his skin, but it wasn't the chill that made him uneasy. It was the looks, the sideways glances and occasional snickers from those around him. He tried not to let it bother him. Max wasn't here to impress anyone. He wasn't here for the overpriced drinks or the pulsing music that seeped through the club's heavy doors. He had a purpose, though it wasn't something he felt like explaining. Not yet. The bouncer stood at the entrance like a fortress wall, tall, broad, and intimidating. He was dressed in all black, his sunglasses reflecting the golden glow of the club's logo above the door. Each time the line inched forward, Max's stomach tightened. He could hear the comments behind him, soft whispers just loud enough for him to catch. Look at him. Does he really think he's getting in? Must have gotten lost on his way to the thrift store. Max clenched his fists inside his pockets, but he kept his face calm. He had heard worse before. People always made assumptions based on what they saw: a skinny kid in hand-me-downs with messy hair and a backpack slung over one shoulder. They didn't know what he carried inside, both in his bag and in his mind. Finally, Max reached the front of the line. The bouncer looked him up and down, his expression unreadable. Max cleared his throat, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Hi. I'm here too." The bouncer raised a hand, cutting him off. "Not tonight, kid," he said flatly, already turning to the next group of people in line. "But Max started, but the bouncer's eyes narrowed. "I said no," he repeated, louder this time. The group behind Max laughed, and one of them muttered, "Told you so." Max felt the heat rise to his face. He stepped back, the sting of embarrassment tightening his chest. For a moment, he considered walking away, but then he looked back at the club's glowing sign. Eclipse. He wasn't here to party. He wasn't here to fit in. He had something to prove, not to the bouncer, not to the people in line, but to himself. Max moved to the side of the entrance, leaning against the wall as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. He watched as the crowd flowed past him, their laughter and confidence filling the air. He could have left. It would have been easy to blend into the shadows, to head home and forget the whole thing. But something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. He thought about the months leading up to this moment, the late nights, the countless setbacks, and the endless hours spent working on an idea that no one believed in. He thought about his mother, who always told him to dream big even when their reality was small. Max had learned early in life that people didn't see the potential in someone like him. Teachers wrote him off as unmotivated. His classmates barely noticed him, except to crack jokes at his expense. But Max had a gift, a mind that worked in ways even he didn't fully understand yet. From a young age, he'd been fascinated by puzzles and patterns, always finding solutions to problems that left others stumped. He didn't know what to call it, but he knew it set him apart. Tonight, that gift was the reason he was here. He glanced at the bouncer again. The man was busy checking IDs, barely sparing Max a second glance. Max took a deep breath and turned away from the entrance, walking around the corner of the building. The alley behind the club was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of garbage and faint traces of spilled alcohol. Max's footsteps echoed softly as he made his way to a small side door he had spotted earlier. It was unmarked, blending in with the gray bricks, but Max had a knack for noticing things others overlooked. He pulled a notebook out of his backpack, flipping through pages filled with sketches, notes, and calculations. His pen scratched against the paper as he double-checked his work. The lock on the door was electronic, a sleek panel with a keypad and a small screen. Most people would see it as an impassable barrier. Max saw it as a challenge. Pulling out a small device he had built himself, Max connected it to the panel. The screen lit up, displaying a series of numbers and symbols. Max's fingers moved quickly, entering commands and watching as the device worked its magic. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. After a few tense moments, there was a soft click. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway bathed in blue light. Max grinned to himself, his heart pounding. This wasn't about sneaking into the club, it was about proving that he could. As he stepped inside, Max's mind raced with possibilities. The club's interior was a maze of flashing lights and thumping bass, but Max wasn't here for the music. He made his way through the shadows, staying out of sight as he scanned the room. At the center of the club, a group of people gathered around a raised platform. They were older, dressed in expensive suits and dresses, their laughter cutting through the noise. Max recognized them from the photos he had studied. They were the investors, the people who could make or break his future. This was his moment. He adjusted his backpack and stepped forward, his nerves threatening to overwhelm him. But then he thought about everything it had taken to get here: the ridicule, the doubts, the rejection. He wasn't just a kid in old sneakers. He was Max Harper, and tonight, he was going to show them who he really was. Max's steps faltered as he approached the platform. The music seemed louder here, the heavy bass vibrating through the floor. The group was deep in conversation, their gestures animated as they discussed something he couldn't quite hear. For a moment, doubt crept into Max's mind. What if they didn't take him seriously? What if they laughed at him the same way the people in line had? He pushed the thought away. He hadn't come this far just to walk away now. Max scanned the group, looking for an opening. One man stood slightly apart from the rest, holding a glass of champagne and glancing occasionally at his watch. His suit was perfectly tailored, his expression calm but calculating. Max recognized him instantly: Victor Langston, a venture capitalist known for his sharp mind and even sharper tongue. He was the one Max needed to impress. Max took a deep breath and approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Langston," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. Victor turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked Max up and down. "Who are you?" "My name is Max Harper," he said, doing his best to sound confident. "I have something I think you'll want to see." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Do you? And what makes you think I have time for whatever this is?" Max swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, but under Victor's scrutinizing gaze, his carefully planned words seemed to evaporate. I know you're busy," Max stammered. "But I promise, this won't take long. I've developed something that could change everything." Victor's lips twitched, almost as if he were suppressing a smile. "Change everything, you say? That's quite the claim." "I can prove it," Max said quickly, reaching for his backpack. He unzipped it and pulled out a small device, no bigger than a deck of cards. It was sleek and unassuming, but Max's heart raced as he held it up. Victor tilted his head, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "And what exactly is that supposed to be?" "It's a prototype," Max said, his confidence growing. "A new type of AI-driven algorithm that can optimize complex systems in real time. It can predict outcomes, identify inefficiencies, and make adjustments faster than anything currently on the market." Victor stared at the device, then back at Max. "You're telling me you built this?" "Yes," Max said firmly. "In your bedroom?" Max hesitated. "Mostly." Victor let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Kid, do you have any idea how many people pitch me revolutionary ideas every week? Most of them have advanced degrees and million-dollar labs, and even they can't deliver on their promises. Why should I believe you're any different? Because I've already tested it, Max said. He reached into his bag again, pulling out a tablet. He tapped a few buttons, and the screen came to life, displaying a series of graphs and charts. These are the results from a small logistics company I worked with. Their efficiency increased by 40% in just 2 weeks. And that's just the beginning. Victor's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. For the first time, there was a hint of genuine interest in his expression. 40%, he muttered, more to himself than to Max. He glanced back at the device, then at Max. You're either a genius or a very good liar. I'm not sure which. Why not find out? Max said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Victor considered him for a long moment before finally nodding. Fine. Show me what it can do. Max's heart leaped. He placed the device on the edge of the platform and began typing on the tablet, linking the two. The screen displayed a live feed of the club's energy usage lights, sound systems, even the refrigeration units in the kitchen. This is real-time data from the club, Max explained. Watch what happens when I activate the algorithm. He tapped a button, and the screen shifted. Lines of code scrolled past, and the graphs began to stabilize. The energy usage dropped significantly, while the system's performance remained unaffected. Victor's eyes widened. You're optimizing the club's power consumption. Yes, Max said. And it's doing it in seconds. Imagine what this could mean for industries like manufacturing, transportation, or healthcare. The group around them had started to notice the demonstration, their conversations trailing off as they watched. One woman stepped forward, her curiosity evident. What's going on, Victor? She asked. Apparently, we've got a young prodigy in our midst, Victor said, his tone half sarcastic but laced with intrigue. Max glanced at the woman, recognizing her as Evelyn Chang, a tech entrepreneur known for her no-nonsense attitude. She crossed her arms, looking Max over. Prodigy, huh, she said. Let's see what else he's got. Max felt the weight of their gazes, but he refused to let it intimidate him. He launched into a detailed explanation of the algorithm, using simple terms to make it accessible. He described how it could be applied to everything from streamlining supply chains to reducing energy waste on a global scale. As he spoke, he noticed the skepticism on their faces begin to fade. Evelyn leaned in closer, asking sharp, pointed questions that Max answered with ease. Victor remained silent, his expression unreadable, but Max could tell he was listening intently. By the time Max finished, the group had grown quiet. Even the music seemed distant compared to the intensity of their focus. Victor broke the silence. You've got my attention, kid. But attention isn't enough. If you want my backing, you'll need to prove this can scale. I can, Max said without hesitation. Give me a week, and I'll show you results you can't ignore. Victor smirked. You've got guts, I'll give you that. All right, 1 week. Don't waste it. Max nodded, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. This was it, the opportunity he had been waiting for. The night had taken a turn Max hadn't fully anticipated, but as he stepped out of the club into the cool night air, he felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just the kid with the worn-out sneakers anymore. He was Max Harper, and he was ready to prove to the world that greatness didn't come from where you started, it came from what you were willing to fight for. The streets around Eclipse buzzed with energy, a constant swirl of car horns, chatter, and laughter. Inside the club, the music thumped like a heartbeat, loud enough to drown out even the sharpest thoughts. For most people, it was a night of glamour and indulgence, but for Max Harper, it was something entirely different. Max stood near the corner of the building, his breath visible in the cool night air. He had already been dismissed by the bouncer, and the sting of that rejection still lingered. He watched as group after group of partygoers passed by him, women in glittering dresses, men in sharp suits, all flashing their IDs and receiving a quick nod from the towering gatekeeper. "Guess you've got to look the part," Max muttered under his breath, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. Across the street, a sleek black car rolled up to the curb. It was a luxury model, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the city lights like a mirror. The car door opened, and a man stepped out, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored suit. His every movement radiated confidence and power, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The bouncer straightened immediately, his rigid posture a stark contrast to the casual indifference he'd shown Max. "Good evening, Mr. Langston," the bouncer said, his tone suddenly respectful. "Right this way, sir." Victor Langston, the man Max had hoped to impress, didn't spare a glance at the growing line of hopeful patrons. He strode toward the entrance, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement, the crowd parting for him like water. Max watched from his corner, his jaw tightening. He couldn't help but feel the sharp divide between himself and someone like Victor. One of them was welcomed with open arms, while the other was treated like he didn't belong. Inside Eclipse, the atmosphere was a heady mix of flashing lights, pounding bass, and the clinking of glasses. The crowd on the dance floor moved like a single organism, their energy infectious. Around the edges of the room, groups gathered in private booths, their laughter and conversations blending into the background noise. Victor made his way to a VIP section cordoned off by a velvet rope. A hostess greeted him with a dazzling smile, leading him to a corner booth where other high-profile guests were already seated. Meanwhile, Max slipped through a side entrance he had unlocked earlier. The narrow hallway was a stark contrast to the opulence of the club, its walls lined with pipes and electrical panels. Max's footsteps echoed softly as he made his way toward the main floor, careful to stay out of sight. When he finally emerged, he found himself on the edge of the bustling crowd. The dazzling lights and pounding music were almost overwhelming, but Max's focus was razor-sharp. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Victor, seated with a group of investors. They were laughing, their voices rising above the noise, their expensive watches glinting in the light. Max's stomach churned. He knew he didn't look like he belonged here. His clothes were plain, his hair unkempt, and his backpack clashed with the sleek aesthetic of the club. But he reminded himself why he was here. As Max approached the VIP area, the hostess intercepted him, her smile fading the moment she got a good look at him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. "I need to speak with Victor Langston," Max said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. The hostess raised an eyebrow, glancing at the velvet rope separating the VIP section from the rest of the club. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important," Max insisted. Her smile returned, but it was laced with condescension. "I'm afraid Mr. Langston doesn't take unscheduled meetings. Perhaps you can send an email." Max's face flushed. "I just need 5 minutes of his time. Please." The hostess's expression hardened. "Sir, this area is for VIP guests only. If you don't have a reservation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Behind her, a security guard stepped forward, his imposing frame making it clear that the conversation was over. Max clenched his fists, biting back the frustration rising in his chest. "Fine," he muttered, stepping back. Max moved to the edge of the dance floor, staying just out of sight of the security guards. From his new vantage point, he could see Victor and his group more clearly. They were deep in conversation, their words occasionally punctuated by bursts of laughter. "I told him to triple the investment," Victor was saying, his voice carrying over the noise. "If he can't handle it, he's not worth my time." Another man at the table chuckled, swirling his drink. "Typical. They all want a piece of the pie but can't handle the heat when it's their turn to deliver." Max's jaw tightened. He recognized the dismissive tone all too well. It was the same tone teachers had used when they wrote him off, the same tone the bouncer had used outside the club. But what stung the most was the realization that Victor wasn't just dismissive, he was arrogant. He had the power to change lives with a single decision, yet he treated it like a game. Max took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He wasn't here to get angry, he was here to prove himself. He reached into his backpack, pulling out the prototype he had worked so hard to create. It felt heavy in his hands, not because of its weight but because of everything it represented. He thought about the nights he had spent working on it by the dim light of his desk lamp. He thought about the sacrifices his mom had made to support him, even when she barely had enough for herself. And he thought about the people who had laughed at him, doubted him, and told him he'd never amount to anything. This is my chance, he thought. I just need to make them see. Max's eyes scanned the room again, this time with a sense of purpose. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was someone with something to offer, something they couldn't ignore. Max stepped away from the crowd, retreating to a quiet corner of the club. He pulled out his tablet, connecting it to the prototype. The device hummed softly as it powered on, its screen displaying a series of numbers and graphs. Max's fingers moved quickly, inputting commands and running tests. He was determined to find a way to demonstrate the power of his invention, even if Victor and his group refused to listen. As he worked, a plan began to take shape in his mind. He couldn't approach Victor directly, not yet. But he could create a situation that would force Victor to pay attention. Max's mind raced as he continued typing on his tablet. He was no stranger to rejection, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just another dismissive comment from a teacher or a sneer from someone who thought he didn't belong. This was an opportunity to stand toe-to-toe with people who controlled the future of industries. He wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. As the music pounded in the background, Max analyzed the club's network. His invention wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was a system that could tap into and optimize any connected system in real time. It wasn't intrusive or destructive, but it was revolutionary. He noticed inefficiencies everywhere: the club's power grid, the sound system's uneven output, even the kitchen's refrigeration usage. It was like a symphony out of tune, and Max knew how to make it harmonious. He hesitated, though. Was this crossing a line? Would making his system work behind the scenes without permission cause more harm than good? He glanced back at Victor's table. The man was laughing again, clearly unimpressed by anything outside his own sphere of importance. Sometimes you have to take risks, Max thought, his fingers moving with renewed determination. Within minutes, Max's prototype was quietly connected to the club's network. He watched as the device's algorithms began to do their work, smoothing out inefficiencies and balancing energy consumption. The changes were subtle at first: a sharper clarity in the music, a slight dimming of the overly bright lights, a steadying of the power fluctuations in the kitchen. To the average guest, the improvements were almost imperceptible, but to the staff running the club, it was like a sudden easing of tension. "What's going on with the lights?" a technician asked, glancing at the control panel. "Not sure," another replied. "But the system's running smoother than it has in months." "Did someone tweak the settings?" "Nope. But whatever it is, I'm not complaining." Max allowed himself a small smile as he watched the results. This was his first step. Now he just needed to make sure the right people noticed. Victor's attention was still firmly on his companions as the changes rippled through the club. One of the investors at his table, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, suddenly paused mid-conversation. "Is it just me, or did the sound system improve?" he asked, looking around. Victor frowned. "The sound system?" "Yes," the man insisted. "It's clearer now. And the lighting, it's not as harsh. Feels intentional." Victor leaned back, his eyes scanning the room. He hadn't noticed it before, but now that it was pointed out, he couldn't deny it. The ambience felt refined, almost as if the club had undergone an invisible upgrade. The man turned to Victor. "You have a stake in this place, don't you?" Victor nodded. "Well, whoever's running things tonight is doing a stellar job. You might want to give them a raise." Victor's brow furrowed. He didn't like surprises, especially ones that involved his investments. Seeing Victor's reaction, Max decided it was time to take the next step. He disconnected the prototype from the club's network, letting the system revert to its original state. The lighting brightened again, the sound lost its clarity, and the staff began noticing the old inefficiencies creeping back. It didn't take long for Victor and his group to pick up on it. "What the hell?" Victor muttered, looking around. The man who had praised the improvements earlier now frowned, clearly confused. Max seized the moment. Slinging his backpack over his shoulder, he walked toward the VIP section again. This time, he didn't wait for permission. The hostess stepped forward, her expression stern. "Sir, I told you." "I know what you told me," Max interrupted, his voice steady. "But if you don't let me speak to Victor Langston right now, you're going to regret it." The firmness in his tone caught her off guard, and for a moment, she hesitated. "What's going on here?" Victor's voice cut through the noise as he stood, his sharp gaze landing on Max. Max met his eyes, refusing to look away. "I can explain what just happened with the club systems. But only if you give me 5 minutes of your time." Victor crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You're the kid they turned away earlier, aren't you?" "Yes," Max said, lifting his chin. "And I'm also the reason your club just ran better than it ever has." The investors around Victor exchanged curious glances. Victor, however, didn't move. "You've got 5 minutes, he said finally. "Make it count." Max stepped forward, pulling the prototype from his bag. He placed it on the table in front of Victor, the sleek device glinting under the club's lights. "This is what I use to optimize the club's systems," Max began. "It's a prototype I've been working on for years. It analyzes connected networks and finds ways to improve efficiency in real time. Whether it's energy consumption, logistics, or even human resource management, this system can adapt to any scenario." Victor raised an eyebrow. "And you did this, remotely? Without authorization?" Max hesitated but nodded. "I had to show you what it could do. Words wouldn't have been enough." The salt and pepper-haired investor leaned in, his interest evident. "Real-time optimization across multiple systems. That's not a small claim. How does it work?" Max launched into a concise explanation, using simple terms to break down the complex algorithms and machine learning models behind his invention. He kept his tone confident but approachable, aware that he was walking a fine line between impressing them and overwhelming them. By the time he finished, the table was silent. Even Victor seemed intrigued, though he hid it well. "Interesting," Victor said at last. "But ideas are cheap. What matters is execution. Can this thing scale? Can it handle real-world complexity outside of a controlled environment?" Max nodded. "Give me a week, and I'll prove it." Victor smirked. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. All right, 1 week. But if you waste my time, you'll regret it." Max's heart raced as Victor extended a hand. He shook it firmly, his grip steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As Max left the club, the cool night air hit him like a wave. He felt lighter, as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He had taken a chance, stood his ground, and secured an opportunity that could change his life. But he knew the real work was just beginning. Victor wasn't going to invest in empty promises. Max would need to deliver results and fast. Still, as he walked down the dimly lit street, a faint smile played on his lips. He might not have the wealth, connections, or polished appearance of people like Victor, but he had something far more valuable, the drive to prove them all wrong. The hum of the city faded into the background as Max walked down the dim alley behind Eclipse. The cold night air bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, replaying the events of the night and what lay ahead. Victor Langston's challenge was clear: 1 week to prove that his invention wasn't just another lofty idea. Max tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack. He had taken the first step, but there was no room for mistakes now. This was his chance, a slim, fragile chance to rewrite his story. As Max reached the quiet streets leading to his apartment, he felt his phone buzz in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw an email notification from an unfamiliar address. Subject: tonight's performance. Sender: Eclipse Management. Frowning, Max opened the message. Dear Mr. Harper, it has come to our attention that you accessed Eclipse's systems without prior authorization. While the results were undeniably impressive, we cannot condone such actions. Please be advised that any future attempts to interfere with our operations will be met with legal consequences. Sincerely. Operations Team, Eclipse Nightclub. Max exhaled sharply. He'd expected some fallout from his bold move, but seeing it in black and white made the stakes feel more real. However, a single sentence stood out to him: the results were undeniably impressive. They'd noticed. And more importantly, they'd acknowledged the value of his work. Back at his tiny apartment, Max spread his tools and components across the cluttered table that doubled as his workspace. The prototype sat in the center, its sleek design a stark contrast to the chaos around it. He plugged it into his laptop and began reviewing the data it had collected during its brief connection to Eclipse's systems. The numbers were astonishing. Energy usage had dropped by 15% in less than 10 minutes. The sound and lighting systems, once disjointed, had synced seamlessly, creating an immersive atmosphere that guests had clearly noticed. Max leaned back in his chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This wasn't just potential, it was proof. Now he just needed to take it further. He grabbed a notebook and began sketching out a plan. His invention needed more than just tweaks, it needed a demonstration that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, Max made his way to the local electronics store to pick up supplies. As he browsed the aisles, he felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning, he saw a young woman with a kind smile. She looked vaguely familiar. "Hey," she said. "You're the guy from last night, right? The one who got into it with the bouncer." Max blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. That was me." "I thought so." She extended a hand. "I'm Riley. I work in Eclipse's tech department. I saw what you did with the systems." Max hesitated before shaking her hand. "And you're not here to yell at me?" Riley laughed. "No, actually, I'm impressed. You did in minutes what our team has been struggling to figure out for months." "How'd you do it?" Max shrugged, feeling a mix of pride and caution. "Just a lot of late nights and trial and error." "Well, whatever you did, it worked. Victor might not admit it, but you caught his attention. And trust me, that's not easy to do." Riley's words sent a jolt of confidence through Max. If someone on the inside believed in his work, maybe he wasn't as far off course as he sometimes felt. As Max gathered his supplies and headed home, Riley's words replayed in his mind. Her encouragement was reassuring, but it also raised a question he hadn't considered: why had Eclipse's tech team been struggling in the first place? Digging through the club's publicly available information, Max found a few subtle hints. Over the past year, complaints about glitches in Eclipse's systems had surfaced online. Patrons mentioned flickering lights, inconsistent sound, and even sudden blackouts. This wasn't just a technical issue, it was a pattern. And it meant that Eclipse was vulnerable. Max's fingers hovered over his keyboard as an idea began to form. He could position his invention not just as a convenience but as a solution to a problem they couldn't ignore. Over the next few days, Max barely slept. He worked tirelessly, refining his invention and testing its capabilities. His small apartment became a maze of wires, circuit boards, and empty coffee cups. Each improvement brought new challenges. The system needed to be faster, more adaptable, and capable of handling larger networks. But with every hurdle, Max's determination grew. One night, as he ran yet another simulation, a breakthrough occurred. The system successfully optimized a mock network 40% faster than before. Max stared at the results, a surge of excitement coursing through him. This was at the edge he needed. On the fifth day, Max received another email from Victor Langston. Subject: Progress Update. Max. You've got 2 days left. I hope you're ready to deliver. Remember, I don't deal in excuses. Victor. The message was brief but carried an unmistakable weight. Max felt the pressure mount, but instead of crumbling, he used it as fuel. He had 2 days to prove himself, and he wasn't going to waste a second. As the deadline approached, Max's prototype transformed from a collection of raw ideas into a polished product. It was sleek, efficient, and capable of handling even the most complex networks. But Max knew that the invention alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to deliver a presentation that would leave no room for doubt. He rehearsed tirelessly, refining his pitch until it was concise, compelling, and impossible to ignore. On the final night before his meeting with Victor, Max took a moment to reflect. He stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city lights. For years, he had felt invisible, just another face in the crowd. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was on the verge of something extraordinary. As he gazed at the skyline, a thought crossed his mind: if I can pull this off, everything changes. The night before his big meeting with Victor Langston, Max paced his cramped apartment, rehearsing his pitch aloud. His words echoed off the walls as he imagined standing in front of Victor and his skeptical investors. Every sentence had to land perfectly, every detail had to make sense. His invention sat gleaming on the table, a physical representation of years of work and sacrifice. The prototype's polished surface reflected the dim light, almost as if it, too, was waiting for its moment to shine. Max had tested it 100 times in the past few days. It wasn't just working, it was flawless. But the nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that execution wasn't the only challenge. Convincing Victor Langston, a man who'd probably heard every pitch under the sun, was an entirely different beast. Around midnight, as Max was making final adjustments, there was a knock at his door. His heart skipped a beat. No one ever came by at this hour. Opening the door cautiously, he was surprised to see Riley standing there, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Riley." She grinned. "Surprised? I figured you could use some last-minute help." Max stepped aside to let her in, his curiosity piqued. "Not that I'm complaining, but why?" Riley shrugged, setting her bag down. "Call it professional curiosity. I want to see if this thing of yours is as good as you claim." Max smirked, a rare flash of confidence showing. "Oh, it's better than good. But don't take my word for it, let me show you." For the next hour, Max walked Riley through the prototype's capabilities, explaining its features and demonstrating its performance. Riley's initial skepticism faded as she watched the system in action. "This is incredible," she admitted, leaning over the table to get a closer look. "Do you realize how much this could revolutionize not just clubs, but entire industries?" "That's the goal," Max said, trying to keep his excitement in check. But Victor doesn't strike me as someone who cares about the big picture. He wants results, not ideas. Riley nodded. True. But if you can prove this works on a scale he cares about, he'll have no choice but to listen. Her words reinforced Max's determination. He had spent too long being overlooked. Tomorrow was his chance to finally be seen. As Riley packed up to leave, her expression grew serious. Max, there's something you should know, she said, hesitating slightly. What is it? Victor isn't just looking for innovation. He's ruthless when it comes to business. If he sees potential in your system, he'll try to take it whether you're ready or not. Max frowned. You mean steal it? Not exactly. But he'll find a way to control it. He doesn't play fair, Max. Just, be careful. Riley's warning lingered in Max's mind long after she left. He had spent years building his invention. The thought of losing it to someone like Victor was unbearable. But he couldn't back down now. He had come too far. The morning of the meeting, Max woke early, his nerves a chaotic mix of excitement and dread. He packed the prototype carefully into its case, double-checking every connection and component. As he rode the subway to Victor's downtown office, he couldn't help but notice how different the city looked. The streets were bustling with energy, the towering skyscrapers gleaming in the sunlight. For the first time, Max felt like he belonged in this world, like he wasn't just another face in the crowd. When he arrived at the sleek glass building that housed Langston Enterprises, he paused to take a deep breath. This is it, he thought. Everything changes today. Victor's conference room was as intimidating as Max had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while a long, polished table stretched the length of the room. Victor sat at the head of the table, flanked by a group of well-dressed individuals who could only be his investors. Their expressions ranged from disinterest to outright skepticism as Max entered the room. Mr. Harper, Victor said, his tone neutral. Right on time. Let's see if you can live up to your own hype. Max nodded, setting the prototype on the table. He was acutely aware of the investors' eyes on him, their judgment palpable. Max began his pitch, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. He explained the core functionality of his invention, emphasizing its ability to adapt to any network and optimize performance in real time. As he spoke, he activated the prototype, linking it to a simulated network he had prepared. The investors watched as the system immediately began analyzing and optimizing the network, smoothing out inefficiencies and boosting performance. One of the investors, a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit, leaned forward. And this works on larger, more complex systems. Yes, Max said confidently. The system is scalable. It can handle anything from a nightclub's operations to the logistics of a multinational corporation. Victor raised an eyebrow. Bold claim. Can you prove it? Max smiled. That's why I'm here. He pulled up a live demonstration on his laptop, showing the prototype optimizing a larger, more intricate network. The changes were instantaneous, the results undeniable. The investors exchanged glances, their skepticism beginning to waver. As the demonstration continued, Max noticed something interesting. Victor wasn't watching the results on the screen. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Max, his expression unreadable. It was as if Victor wasn't just evaluating the invention, he was evaluating him. The realization sent a chill down Max's spine. Victor wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist. And Max was now a piece on his board. When the demonstration concluded, the room fell silent. The investors looked to Victor, waiting for his verdict. Victor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Impressive, he said finally. You've got something here, Max. Something big. Max's heart raced. This was it, the validation he had been waiting for. But, Victor continued, his tone sharp, potential isn't enough. You'll need funding, resources, and a team to bring this to market. Are you prepared for that? Max nodded. I've spent years building this on my own. Imagine what I could do with the right support. Victor's lips curved into a faint smile. Then let's talk terms. As Max left the building that afternoon, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He had done it, he had proven himself. But Riley's warning echoed in his ears. Victor Langston was many things, but he wasn't a man to be underestimated. Max had stepped into his world, and now, there was no turning back. The city stretched out before him, its possibilities endless. But so were its challenges. Max tightened his grip on the prototype's case, a determined look in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for his invention, he was fighting for his future. The towering skyscrapers of downtown loomed in the background as Max stepped out of the sleek car that had been sent for him. His worn sneakers and rumpled hoodie were a sharp contrast to the pristine black vehicle behind him, but he didn't care. This wasn't about appearances, it was about proving himself. Victor Langston's world was one of immaculate suits, polished floors, and people who measured their worth in zeros. Max didn't belong here, at least, that's what they all thought. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation. Investors, tech moguls, and media representatives filled the room, their low murmurs creating a tense atmosphere. A massive screen hung on the back wall, flanked by LED lights that pulsed faintly. This was where the big deals were made, the kind that turned ideas into empires. Max stood backstage, clutching the case that held his prototype. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. He wasn't the same man who had been turned away at the club. He had faced doubt, rejection, and sabotage, and now, it was time to show everyone what he was truly capable of. Victor strode onto the stage, his commanding presence silencing the crowd. He greeted the audience with a practiced smile, his tone dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today," he began. "You're about to witness the unveiling of a revolutionary system, one that will change the way we think about technology and innovation." Max watched from the wings, his jaw tightening. Victor was setting the stage for a grand introduction, but something about his tone made Max uneasy. "And now," Victor continued, his smile widening, "allow me to introduce the genius behind this creation, my newest collaborator, Max Harper." The room erupted into polite applause as Victor gestured for Max to join him on stage. Max stepped forward, his heart pounding. As Max approached the center of the stage, Victor leaned in, his voice low. "Stick to the script, Max. Show them what they want to see, and leave the rest to me." Max's brow furrowed. The script? He hadn't been given a script. Victor straightened, turning back to the crowd. "Max's system has already been tested in real-world environments, and the results speak for themselves. But today, you'll see just how far we've come." A technician wheeled out a second device, one Max hadn't seen before. It bore a striking resemblance to his prototype, but it wasn't his. Max's stomach sank as realization dawned. Victor had created a replica, likely using data from their earlier demonstrations. "Before we proceed," Victor said, his voice smooth, "let me demonstrate the system's capabilities." He gestured toward the replica, and the technician activated it. For a moment, it hummed to life, its interface lighting up. But then, it began to flicker. The hum grew louder, more erratic, until the entire device shut down with a sharp crackle. The audience murmured in confusion. Victor's smile faltered. Max stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "It doesn't work because it's not real." The room fell silent. Victor turned to Max, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." Max met his gaze, his confidence unwavering. "That's not my system. It's a cheap imitation, and it's failing because it wasn't built to handle what I've created." The crowd buzzed with whispers. Victor's calm demeanor began to crack, but Max wasn't finished. Reaching into his case, Max pulled out his prototype. It gleamed under the stage lights, its sleek design commanding attention. "This," Max said, his voice steady, "is the real system. It's not just an idea or a concept, it's a fully functional, scalable technology that has already proven itself." He connected it to the conference hall's network, his hands moving with practiced precision. The giant screen behind him came to life, displaying real-time data as the system began optimizing the hall's operations. The lights brightened, the audio system synced perfectly, and even the temperature adjusted to a more comfortable level. The audience watched in awe as the numbers on the screen shifted, demonstrating unprecedented efficiency gains. "This is what innovation looks like," Max said, turning to face the crowd. "And no one, not even Victor Langston, can take that away from me." Victor's face was a mask of fury, but he tried to recover. "Impressive," he said through gritted teeth. "But this isn't just about technical performance. It's about trust, partnerships, and delivering results." Max didn't flinch. "Trust? You mean like trying to steal someone's work and passing it off as your own?" Gasps rippled through the audience. Several investors exchanged uneasy glances. Max continued, his voice firm. "I didn't come here to be someone's pawn. I came here to prove that true innovation comes from people who aren't afraid to take risks, who aren't afraid to fail, and who don't need to manipulate others to succeed." The room erupted in applause. Several audience members stood, their admiration for Max evident. One of the investors, the sharp-eyed woman from before, approached the stage. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "I'd like to discuss a direct partnership with you. Your work deserves to stand on its own." Victor's expression darkened as more investors voiced their interest in Max's system. His control over the narrative was slipping through his fingers. Max turned to Victor, his tone calm but resolute. "You underestimated me, Victor. You thought I was just another desperate inventor you could exploit. But now, everyone knows the truth. And they know exactly who you are, too." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The crowd's applause drowned out any attempt he might have made to salvage the situation. As Max left the stage, the weight that had been pressing on him for years seemed to lift. Investors crowded around him, eager to discuss opportunities, but he remained focused. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not because of his clothes or his connections, but because of his work. Outside the building, the city lights shimmered, reflecting the endless possibilities ahead. Max smiled to himself. He hadn't just walked into Victor Langston's world, he had turned it upside down. As the applause in the conference hall slowly died down, Max found himself surrounded by a sea of faces. Investors, reporters, and even skeptics who had doubted him moments ago now clamored for his attention. "Mr. Harper, what inspired you to create this system?" one journalist asked, her microphone thrust forward. "How do you plan to scale this technology for broader markets?" another investor inquired. Max held up a hand, signaling for calm. His heart was pounding, but he felt a new surge of confidence. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let anyone else define it for him. "I'll address all your questions soon," he said, his voice steady. "But first, let's talk about integrity. For years, I've worked in the shadows, dismissed by people who thought my background made me unworthy of their time. But I stand here today not because someone gave me a chance, but because I refused to give up on myself." The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. "This system isn't just a tool," Max continued. "It's a symbol of what's possible when innovation isn't dictated by greed or power but by a desire to solve real problems. And I'm here to make sure it stays that way." As Max finished speaking, Victor Langston stood, his expression carefully neutral. "That's a nice sentiment, Max," he said, his voice laced with condescension. But let's not forget that success in this industry isn't just about having a good idea. It's about execution, connections, and the ability to navigate a complex market. He turned to the audience, addressing them as if Max wasn't standing right there. What Max has achieved today is impressive, no doubt. But without the right backing, it's just a prototype of potential that may never be realized. The tension in the room thickened as all eyes shifted to Max. But instead of faltering, Max stepped closer to Victor, his eyes unwavering. You're right, Victor. Success isn't just about ideas, it's about action. And unlike you, I don't rely on cutting corners or stealing from others to get there. Gasps rippled through the audience, but Max wasn't done. You think I need you to validate my work? I don't. Because today, everyone in this room saw what this system can do. They saw the truth, and no amount of posturing from you can change that. Victor's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The balance of power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Just as the tension reached its peak, the sharp-eyed investor from earlier stepped forward. Victor, she said, her tone cool, I think we've heard enough from you. She turned to Max, her expression softening. Max, my name is Evelyn Grant. I've been in this business long enough to recognize real potential when I see it. Your system isn't just revolutionary, it's exactly what this industry needs. I'd like to personally fund your next phase of development. Before Max could respond, another voice chimed in. Count me in as well, said a man in a gray suit. Your work is too important to let it get buried under corporate politics. One by one, more investors voiced their support, their focus shifting entirely away from Victor. Victor tried to mask his frustration, but the cracks in his facade were visible. For years, he had been the one in control, the one dictating terms. But now, he was watching his carefully constructed empire of influence crumble before his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, forcing a smile, let's not act hastily. Collaboration is key to any successful venture, and I believe we can all find a way to work together. Collaboration. Evelyn interrupted, her tone sharp. Is that what you call what just happened here? Because to me, it looks a lot like theft. The room fell silent again, and Victor's composure slipped further. Max decided to twist the knife just a little more. Victor, maybe it's time you took a step back. This isn't your moment, it's mine. The audience erupted into applause once more, sealing Victor's fate. After the meeting, Max found himself standing outside the building, the prototype case still clutched tightly in his hand. The crisp evening air felt different, lighter, freer. For the first time in years, he felt like he could truly breathe. Riley appeared beside him, a sly grin on her face. So, you're a big deal now, huh? Max laughed, shaking his head. I don't know about that. But I think I finally proved I'm not just some nobody. Not just proved it, you owned it, Riley said. Watching Victor squirm like that? Worth every second. Max's smile faded slightly as he thought about Victor. Do you think he'll come after me? Riley shrugged. Probably. But you've got something he doesn't, the truth. And people are finally starting to see it. As Max walked away from the building, he felt the weight of the day begin to lift. The investors who had backed him weren't just offering money, they were offering validation. And with their help, he knew he could take his invention to heights he had only dreamed of. But more importantly, Max realized that this victory wasn't just about proving Victor wrong. It was about proving to himself that he had always been capable, even when the world tried to tell him otherwise. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a reminder of the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Max tightened his grip on the prototype case, his resolve stronger than ever. He wasn't just walking into a new chapter of his life, he was running toward it, ready to embrace whatever came next. Max stood at the edge of the bustling street, the weight of the day's events still settling over him. The crowd inside the conference hall had long since dispersed, but the ripples of his victory were still being felt. He felt a mix of pride, disbelief, and relief, all of it swirling inside him, threatening to overwhelm him. He had done it. The day had started like any other, with nerves and uncertainty gnawing at him. But now, Max stood on the precipice of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. He had proven himself. Not just to Victor, not just to the investors, but to himself. He had reclaimed his dignity. And then there was Victor Langston, who had tried to steal everything from him. The man who had dismissed him, belittled him, and used his connections to climb to the top. Victor's empire had crumbled in front of his very eyes, and now, there would be no escaping the consequences of his actions. In the days following the event, the consequences of Victor's arrogance began to unfold. News outlets were quick to pick up the story of Max's unexpected triumph, and the more they dug into Victor's past, the more cracks appeared in his perfect image. The investors who had once followed Victor's every word began to distance themselves, no longer willing to stand behind someone whose integrity had come into question. Victor's phone rang endlessly, but the calls were no longer filled with praise or offers. They were filled with cold voices delivering messages of regret and withdrawal. Max knew this was only the beginning. It wasn't just the investors or the public who were turning their backs on Victor. Even the employees who had once worshipped him were starting to question their loyalty. Max had created a ripple effect, and it was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Max received an unexpected call. "Mr. Harper," the voice on the other end said, "this is Evelyn Grant. I just wanted to update you on the situation with Victor." Max's heart skipped a beat. He had expected this call, but it still felt surreal. "We've gone through everything," Evelyn continued. "It's worse than we thought. Victor has been using insider information for years, taking credit for others' work, and using underhanded tactics to suppress competition. The investigation is already underway, and I'm certain his company is about to face some serious legal consequences." Max leaned back in his chair, trying to process the words. Justice was finally being served. The news broke quickly. Headlines flashed across screens everywhere, detailing Victor Langston's fall from grace. His company was under investigation for multiple unethical practices, and the evidence was damning. The press went into a frenzy, dissecting his every move, exposing his lies and manipulations. Max had been an unknown inventor just days before, but now his name was on the front page of every major news outlet. The contrast was stark. One man had spent his career building a reputation on falsehoods, while the other had quietly worked, unnoticed, until the truth could no longer be ignored. Victor Langston's name was tarnished beyond repair. The once powerful CEO was now a pariah in the industry he had once ruled. No one wanted to be associated with him anymore, and even his most loyal followers were beginning to jump ship. The weight of his actions had caught up with him, and there would be no escape this time. Max couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had fought for this moment, and now it was here. With the press continuing to follow Victor's downfall, Max took a step back from the chaos. His work was no longer just about technology, it was about redemption. Max had become more than an inventor. He had become a symbol of resilience and integrity. But the most rewarding part of it all was seeing the people who had doubted him come around. Riley, his most trusted ally, was the first to congratulate him. "You did it, Max," she said, her voice full of pride. "You really did it?" Max smiled, but there was a quiet hum of emotion in his chest. He hadn't done it alone. And for the first time, he felt like he had a team that truly believed in him. The investors who had supported him now showered him with opportunities. They didn't just want a piece of his invention, they wanted to be part of his journey. One by one, Max's phone buzzed with offers of new partnerships, funding, and even recognition from other tech giants. As he sat at his desk that evening, reflecting on how far he had come, he realized that all the struggles, all the challenges, had led to this moment. He had risen from the shadows, and the world was finally taking notice. Then, the door to his office opened, and Evelyn Grant walked in, a wide smile on her face. "I just came from the board meeting," she said, her tone warm. "You've got a direct path now, Max. We're moving forward with the full-scale production of your system. The world is ready for this." Max stood up, shaking her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Evelyn nodded. "You earned it. And it's not just about technology, Max. It's about who you are. People believe in you now. You've proven yourself." Meanwhile, Victor's life continued to unravel. His company was seized by the authorities, and the legal battles began in full force. Investors who had once revered him were now distancing themselves from the disaster he had created. Victor tried to salvage what he could, but it was clear that the damage was done. There were whispers that he might face charges: fraud, corporate espionage, and worse. His once untouchable reputation had crumbled, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his greed. Max knew that Victor would never be the same. He had let his ego, his arrogance, and his underhanded tactics destroy everything he had worked for. And now, the world was watching as his empire fell. Weeks passed, and Max's life began to settle into a new rhythm. He was no longer the overlooked inventor in the back corner of the industry. He was a leader, a force to be reckoned with. The company was growing, and with the backing of loyal investors and partners, Max's technology began to change the world in ways he had only dreamed of. But more than anything, Max had regained his dignity. He had reclaimed his power, his self-respect, and his place in the world. He wasn't just a man with a great idea, he was a man who had overcome the odds and fought for his dreams. One afternoon, Max stood outside his office, looking out at the city skyline. The future felt wide open, and for the first time, he could see everything he had worked for coming to fruition. He had found his place in the world, and no one, not Victor Langston, not anyone, could take that away from him. Max stood on the balcony of his new office, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The hustle of the city below seemed so distant now, as if it belonged to someone else, someone who didn't know what it felt like to fight for every inch of success. Max had come a long way from the man who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. He remembered the countless moments when people had doubted him, when they had looked at him and seen nothing more than a quiet, unknown inventor with big ideas but no real chance. The bouncer outside the club, the investors who had turned him away, even Victor Langston himself, they all thought Max was nothing more than a shadow in the corner, a fleeting presence that would soon be forgotten. But the truth had always been different. Max had always known that the strength he carried inside was more powerful than anything anyone could see on the surface. And now, as he stood here, looking over the city he had once only dreamed of changing, Max understood something crucial: the opinions of others don't define you. What defines you is how you rise when the world tries to knock you down, how you keep going when it feels like no one else believes in you, and how you stand firm in your own worth, no matter how small or insignificant others might make you feel. It wasn't just about the technology he had created. It wasn't even about the millions of dollars or the recognition from investors. It was about the journey. It was about proving to himself that he could survive the hardest battles and emerge stronger. It was about showing that no matter how many people tried to push him aside, he would always find a way to stand up again. He had done it, not for the world's approval, but because he believed in his own strength. The path Max had walked was not an easy one. There had been times when he'd wanted to give up, times when the weight of his dreams felt like too much to bear. But he kept moving forward, step by step, holding on to the belief that he could make a difference. He didn't know how long it would take, or if the world would even notice, but he knew one thing for sure: he would never stop believing in himself. and that belief was what led him to this moment. The world had tried to tell him that he wasn't good enough. It had thrown obstacles in his path, made him doubt his worth, and tried to push him into a box where he didn't belong. But Max had refused to fit into that box. He had broken free, not just to prove the doubters wrong, but to prove to himself that he had the power to change his own story. He thought about Victor Langston, who had tried to use power and money to keep others down. Victor had learned the hard way that the truth always finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it has the power to change everything. Victor's empire had fallen because he had underestimated the strength of the quiet, determined people he had trampled on. Max's story was proof of that. The world might be loud, it might be filled with voices telling you that you don't matter, but if you hold your ground, if you stay true to who you are, you can change the course of your life. Max had done it, and if he could, anyone could. He thought of the people who had stood by him. Riley, Evelyn, and all the others who had seen his potential even when the world couldn't. It wasn't just about one man's success. It was about all the people who had believed in him, even when it was hard. They had been the light that helped him keep going, the people who saw beyond his struggles to the person he could become. And now, together, they were making something bigger than just a company or an invention. They were creating a movement. They were showing the world that no one should ever be underestimated. Max's journey had been long, and at times it had been painful, but it had also been one of growth. He had learned that no matter how tough things got, no matter how many doors closed in his face, the only thing that mattered was his determination to keep moving forward. It wasn't the opinions of the people who doubted him that shaped his path, it was the actions he took, the choices he made, and the belief he carried in his heart. As Max looked at the horizon, a quiet smile spread across his face. He had reached a place he had only dreamed of, but this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. There were more people out there, people just like him, who needed to hear this message. They needed to know that their worth wasn't determined by the opinions of others. They needed to know that their voice mattered. They needed to know that if they kept going, if they stayed true to who they were, they could overcome any obstacle. Max had learned that the journey was just as important as the destination, that the struggle made the victory sweeter, and that the strength to rise again was the greatest power a person could have. He had fought for his place, and now that he had it, he would use his platform to help others do the same. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Max whispered to himself, "The world will always try to tell you you're not good enough. But if you hold your head high and keep believing in yourself, the right people will see your worth. And when they do, their opinions will be the only ones that matter." With that, Max turned back to the office, ready to face whatever came next. He had learned that his journey wasn't just about changing his life, it was about changing the world, one step at a time. And that was exactly what he planned to do.